Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula here.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Tsu is still spitting on those ones and twos. Fam, share and share away.
Yeah,
Ladies
that's
and
what I was
gentlemen, we
doing.
have a couple great guests with us today. Fam is sharing the video. If you guys can go out there. We only have 16 likes. Come on. Help us out. You haven't signed up for our ROKFIN yet? ROKFIN. I know who you are because these guys that are with us today, they're also on ROKFIN. Friends of the fam, here to give us the lowdown on what to expect from Julian Assange and what's going to happen. We have Steve Poikonen and Andrew Smith from Action from Assange. How you doing, boys?
I'm good. How are you tonight?
Awesome. Andrew, how you doing over there, buddy?
Andrew's good. I'm living the refugee life. That's new, exciting.
Nice.
Keep having to come up with creative locations to broadcast around this property. You can't do it indoors anywhere. There's not good enough Wi-Fi. So I have a hotspot on my phone in various little spots around this little beachfront property that is fully staffed with armed agents of the state. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's never a dull moment to you, Poikonen, I'll tell you that much. Well, I'm just glad that you're safe. And it's important that we have you on today. It was kind of a groundbreaking day today. Some breaking news came through about Snowden. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But get us up to date with where we are right now, Steve, when it comes to Julian Assange. Where is he being held? When is his next day in court? What can we expect? What are we hoping for? Take your time unpacking, and maybe, Andrew, you can piggyback off of Steve when he's done.
Sure. So currently, and for the last slightly over 500 days, Julian Assange has been held in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom, Belmarsh Prison, where he currently has no charges and has been a remand prisoner with no bail and no charges for an extended period of time. His rendition, extraordinary rendition, and show trial begins anew on Monday, September 7th, at the Old Bailey there in London, where he is facing a broad daylight kidnapping by a hostile U.S. government, where they hope to bring him to the Eastern District of Virginia, which is espionage court, and sentence him to 175 years for doing journalism and embarrassing the United States government. It's the result of a 10-year or more long war on Julian Assange, the person, WikiLeaks, the publishing outlet, and it spanned presidential administrations. What Donald Trump has done that Barack Obama would not do is go ahead with filing charges and attempting to prosecute Julian. Obama ran into something that they called the New York Times problem while they were going through their secret grand jury and their secret indictment of Julian Assange. And the New York Times problem simply says, if you charge a publisher with espionage for doing journalism, that opens the door for any and every publishing outlet to be charged with doing journalism. So where the Obama administration balked, the Trump administration went forward, and we have seen so much just fuckery with this case. There was a superseding indictment that was issued a few weeks ago, which expands the conspiracy to commit computer intrusion charge. And that's where Assange is basically charged with source protection, is what it essentially boils down to. Something that every investigative journalist does, something that if you were to go want to leak information to the Washington Post right now, They have a instructions on their website as to how to do that. So it's definitely incredibly concerning because we are about to witness the biggest press freedom trial of any of our lifetimes, and it's taking place almost in a media vacuum.
Yeah, and last time back in February when Julian was on in during this hearing, he was actually placed in the back of the courtroom in a glass box, at which, by the definition of the European Court of Human Rights and international law, is a form of torture in and of itself, putting someone inside of a glass box inside of their own court trial. And that doesn't even include all the psychological torture that's happened to Julian over the last 10 years. That doesn't include the 23.5-hour-a-day lockdown that he's been in since February, since the coronavirus lockdown started over in the UK. But to top all of that off, back at the end of August, towards the middle of the end of August, was one of the first times since March that Julian actually got to meet with his lawyers at all. Belmarsh Prison, like most UK prisons, went into an extreme lockdown when coronavirus hit. And what ended up happening was they had to essentially only meet with lawyers over video chat, which in and of itself is like the least secure means in a prison to communicate with your lawyers. And on top of all of that, risking the privacy and communications while he's in Belmarsh, the UC Global case over in Spain has been heating up quite a bit, literally revealing that there was plots to assassinate and poison Julian while he was in the embassy. They had cameras put in the women's bathroom as well as throughout the embassy in and of itself. And above and beyond even just the spying, they were trying to steal diapers out of a garbage can to be able to see if one of the children that was regularly coming into the embassy was Julian's.
Really?
Wow.
When I say give us the update, man, you guys went deep over there. So you're telling me there's no way out of this right now? There's things haven't changed, that he's still moving towards a death sentence if they extradite him to the States, or is there some hope here before he gets to American soil?
Well, the hope is that people stand up and start making noise, because really what this is about is free speech and about free association and about not wanting people to know what Julian's revealed. Judge Vanessa Baraitster, who is the magistrate ruling over Julian's case, has literally throughout this entire process just read pre-prepared statements. When Julian went for his bail hearing, as soon as the coronavirus lockdown started, the judge literally had the stack of papers already on her desk to deny his bail before even listening to any arguments from the defense or listening to Julian's team at all. So the level of corruption within the courts is extremely unprecedented, to the point that at this point it's a hanging judge that's sending Julian to the U.S.
Yeah, she has a 96% conviction rate, and that's on the cases that the outlet Declassified UK was able to find. They filed a Freedom of Information request about this judge's history and were denied and denied and denied. So from what they could cobble through the few public records about her that they were able to access, they found that she has an almost 100% conviction rate in these instances. And we haven't even talked about the magistrate that is overseeing Baraitster, who we've been calling the concierge of the U.S. State Department. The magistrate, Lady Arbuthnot, is overseeing the proceedings. Her husband and her son are mentioned in WikiLeaks. They have profited from the national security state and the surveillance industry. And there is no way that a rational human being could look at all of this and say, oh, well, he's getting his fair day in court, because he's just not. There was a hearing where the Crown prosecutor was huddled in the back of the courtroom with 4 members of the U.S. State Department. And then he turned and walked up and delivered U.S. State Department talking points to Vanessa Baraitster, who went, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds about right. nodding in agreement while snapping at Julian Assange if he spoke. She actually called him a narcissist in the courtroom. This is supposed to be an impartial judge who is shit talking Julian Assange as he's a defendant.
Wow.
Garland Nixon was on my show a few weeks ago, and he said, I'm getting so very tired of hearing the phrase rule of law in general, but specifically where it applies to Julian Assange. There's no rule of law. What we have is an arbitrary application of the law. And the sooner that we can get this through our skulls, the sooner we all may begin to realize exactly what is going on here.
So it's like criminals investigating criminals, which isn't really, it doesn't really instill a lot of trust in us, for us, Julian, at all. But what are you guys, action for Assange? What do you guys have planned for the trial?
So while we're going to be out in DC, it's going to be for the full 3 weeks. Our protests kick off on Friday, the 4th, where we're going to be going to the Capitol building. On Monday, the 7th, we are going to be on the National Mall at the Lincoln Memorial. And then throughout, so from the 4th all the way through, I believe it's the 25th, we have an event planned every day, short of the weekends, because we're using those for educational events to do the vigils. So we're not having a on the ground outside event. A lot of those we should be having like large panel discussions. There's talks that we're going to get some big name guests to actually sit down with us at like the National Press Club and things like that, to be able to go over Julian's case from an actual perspective of the people that have also gone through these situations. But the big thing that we're looking forward to actually is being able to be the voice on the ground for Julian. We're going to be at the British Embassy 3 times. We're going to the Australian Embassy 3 times. We're going to be through multiple different media outlets. Like one of the days we're doing a march from CNN to Google to Fox News, just because it's these major media establishments and internet behemoths that have literally removed Julian from search engines, put the spam on the top of the feed, or spent the last 10 years smearing him. Fox News included in that. So we're gonna do our best to make sure that we can be Julian's voice here on the ground in DC, but also that this time doesn't come and go without at least someone there saying this is wrong, because there's so many other issues that so many other people are fighting for right now. A lot of times when you talk to someone about, hey, there's this prisoner in the UK if he's extradited, it's a threat to all free speech. People go, well, but what about all these other issues?
Right.
And the big thing that we want to help activists and other people in politics, whether it's on the left or the right or whatever the hell you believe in, is you can't fight for anything unless we have free speech. You can't fight for Medicare for all. You can't fight for gun rights, whether you actually have access to truthful information about what is going on in those spheres.
Yeah, 100%. Just to follow up on that real quick. How do you deal with that question? Because like we've always talked about, Pasta and I, leftists in America a lot of them don't care about foreign policy and don't care about civil liberties. In fact, it has been, unfortunately, a lot of the right and the independent libertarian sort of people that have actually paid a lot of attention to that. As of late, a few quabbles of the leftists have paid attention to foreign policy, but the vast majority of people don't consider this an immediate concern. Why? What do you tell them to let them know that this affects directly their fight for Medicare for all, their fight for a Green New Deal, etc.?
This is the future of activism going forward that will be determined here. If we don't have outlets like the Convo Couch who are doing on-the-ground reporting on election integrity, or asking hard-hitting questions to candidates, we have an uninformed and non-participatory electorate. If we don't have mainstream outlets that are even willing to bring on like Nina Turner occasionally, or other Medicare for all advocates, that message doesn't get out. You can't have a conversation about policy or politics in general unless you individual have the ability to look at primary source documentation and decide for yourself how to feel about it without someone from a think tank or some multimillionaire telling you how you should think or feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Andrew, you got anything to add on that? Because this is an important one, because we, with the election integrity thing, I, once made a bunch of tweets that, hey, you want a Green New Deal? Can't have it without election integrity. Hey, you want Medicare for all? Can't have it without election integrity. You want to end the wars? You can't have it without election integrity. But I still think it goes hand in hand with protection of our civil liberties, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. So, Andrew, I'd like a little bit more on your take about that real quick, too, as well, about how we can really get in there and get people to pay attention to this important issue of taking action for Julian Assange.
The biggest thing I'd say is two parts. One is overcoming the language barrier, because the words civil liberty and free speech, depending on where you're at and who you're talking to, mean very different things. To where if you're in a hardcore leftist group and you try to say, hey, help me defend free speech, a lot of times the propaganda that has been put out about that word to those groups turns it into meaning hate speech. So as you work like as an individual activist talking with people, you have to be able to essentially quickly identify what propaganda they have been exposed to, because you may have to address it as the right to expose war crimes or the right to an adversarial press over free speech. But the biggest thing is what we're seeing right now with all these activists and all these protest movements is the rise of the new civil rights era, even if people don't necessarily understand it. Because we're, as a society, on the verge of either slipping into a dystopian nightmare where we essentially lose the ability to write history because we don't have access to information, or we're at the point where we have to bring these different ideological divides together on a specific issue and then start to grow it from there. And I think foundational speech exposing corruption is something that transcends political ideology, because whether you hate Nancy Pelosi or you hate Donald Trump or you hate both, knowing what they're doing is the key to being able to stop them.
Exactly. And
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that, like, even with what's going on right now with the mass protests, it is the framing of the mainstream media and the way they try to pit people against each other that's causing a lot of the misinformation and the fight between the Democrats and Republicans. They're trying to make this bipartisan rather than actually discussing what's actually happening, which is turning a lot of people off and creating a bigger divide. So I think free speech, obviously, that goes along right with it.
Well, and it's such a shame, because when people that are identifying themselves as progressives or leftists hear the phrase free speech, they kind of tune out because they associate it with the alt-right or with conservatives. And it's such a goddamn shame that something as basic as the First Amendment has been co-opted in a way that it's almost it almost gives a negative response to so many people that are, left of center or leftists, just automatically without thinking about it. There's been I don't know if you guys have dropped the quote on this show or not, but in 1981, the CIA director at the time, William Casey, said, "We will know our disinformation campaign is complete when nothing the American public believes is real." Y'all, it's 2020. We're heading into 2021. It's been almost 40 years since the CIA director at the time said that. That alone should have people wondering and questioning whether or not the information that they receive on a daily basis is legitimate. And the way that you can determine that is by looking to see whether or not your content creators are using primary source material, or if they're using mainstream media as the baseline content for their show just so they can wag their finger at the establishment but not go any deeper. You know what I mean? Or am I talking on my
Yeah.
ass?
No, well, you're talking out your ass, but you're talking truth.
Yeah. I want to drop a quote on you guys real quick. I'm a big fan of John Pilger, a filmmaker and writer and just prolific conversationalist and individual. He was talking about meeting Leni Riefenstahl, who was the filmmaker who did all of Hitler's propaganda films. He met the woman behind the Nazi propaganda films. And he says, she told me that the message in her films, the propaganda, was dependent not on orders from above, but on what she called the submissive void of the public. So Pilger asks if this void includes the liberal educated bourgeoisie. And she goes, of course, especially the intelligentsia. When people no longer ask serious questions, they are submissive and malleable. Anything can happen. Disinformation being a response to a question nobody asked. It's too perfect. It leaves no room for doubt and no room for paradoxes. It explains things that haven't been mentioned. Disinformation labels all difficult questions as a sabotage or a treason.
Wow.
It's so funny too, and people, they buy into it, they eat it.
Yep.
I was just thinking about what Andrew said, and I know fans can concur. Like, I was having a disagreement with somebody over one of the first Black Lives Matter rallies we went to on how the police, the California Highway Patrol took place. But we got into an argument, and I was pretty much saying, yeah, well, these activists here, these progressives, they don't care about foreign policy or civil liberties, and they don't know shit about it. And the guy literally said, you sound like a Trump supporter. And I was like, Jesus Christmas.
Right.
I mean, that misinformation campaign from Pilger and, Casey, is complete, because right now it is just, people are just misinformed. They're all over the place, and they don't see the importance of some of these issues. Ken, do you have something to follow up on?
We got people walking around who believe that there are 72 genders, but can only think in binary terms when it comes to politics.
Right.
Yeah. I know.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a hypocrisy of it. Like I said, I was on Jackson Hinkle's show earlier, and it's like people don't want to think beyond like the binaries, and it's hypocritical to question a lot of these things, and that's why the mainstream media gets away with it. Then people start, following the mainstream media outline, because they don't even realize that they're doing it. Because a lot of these quasi progressive voices end up regurgitating the same information, but just make it sound better. So then people are like, oh yeah, look, this is so progressive, this is great. And that's not really what is being said. And they just refuse to really fight. Americans in general don't pay attention. They'll get on the streets for social issues, which are great and all, but like, why did we have so many people out in the streets to protest for Trump's impeachment, but yet we can't get people out in the streets for election integrity, for something as simple as a Medicare for all, these people that want it, and for something like our civil liberties, right? People aren't going out in the streets for economic reasons. I am seeing a shift right now as a result of the economic, destruction, but like, honestly, without the COVID and the pandemic, I wouldn't even see that many people out in the streets. So, I do want to ask, how is Assange's family holding up? Because we hear about him and how he's deteriorating in prison, but he has a partner and a child. How are they holding up?
So overall. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was gonna ask you if you wanted to take this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Stella Morris has put out a couple of videos, as well as been featured in a recent documentary by Juan Passarelli, where she talks about how she's more or less having to accept the fact that Julian may just die in prison, that he may never get to actually spend time out of jail with his two young children again. And Julian's mom is an amazing warrior, Christine. She's been active on social media, constantly debunking the smears and the propaganda that's put out about her son. But even then, there's times where she has to just take a break and everything just becomes too much because for the last 10 years, there's been a concerted effort by public intelligence services like the CIA, FBI, NSA, and other elements of the Department of Justice, as well as by private corporations like UC Global and Stratfor and multiple others, to target Julian specifically and to target his family. So with even them just stepping out into the public light, it's such a great personal risk for them. Literally just having their name out there was one of the things that the court tried to hold over Julian's head to deny his bail. When he put in the bail request originally a few months back, when the pandemic and everything started, Julian put in the request, hey, I would like bail. And they said, well, we're going to have to disclose the name of your significant other that's living inside of the UK. And that was what the court wanted to do, is literally put his fiance and his children on blast. So what they had to do in response to the court trying to expose them in a almost tabloidy clickbait kind of fashion, they had to go and actually produce their own video and put it out about who they were and what their relationship was with Julian, simply to get ahead of the fact that the court was trying to make this propaganda buzz around who they were. They are still fighting, but the situation, it requires everyone to make a difference. The thing that we advocate for over on the Free Assange Vigil is the idea of decentralized activism, where you can be the one person in your community that stands up and makes noise. You can be the one person that goes out and puts up posters or hands out flyers or shakes people's hands. We've asked people throughout the 61 weeks that we've been doing the vigil to reach out to different Congress people, reach out to different state level representatives. And part of that's been an education campaign and getting information about them that to congressional representatives and the heads of trade unions, getting information to them about Julian and his family really personalizes it for them. Because when the first article that they read is the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture explaining how this man's been literally arbitrarily detained and psychologically tortured for 10 years, and then the next article that they see is his fiance worried about the fact that his children may never get to grow up with him, it really makes a big impact on decision makers.
Yeah. And
it's got to be said too with the, his mom. I believe her name is Christine Assange, right, guys?
Yeah, we can show the tweet. She just made a tweet that said this journalist is angry, referring to Jonathan K. Cook. She said, so angry at what's been done to my son that he hasn't held back, has exposed the whole ugly and sordid truth, a mandatory read, especially if you are a journalist. Many thanks, Jonathan Cook, K. Cook. Could you guys talk about what he said a little bit?
I don't know if I'm familiar with what he said.
Oh, okay.
To tell you the truth, I can look at. I'm so scattered from this displacement thing, and I have 3 kids, and I'm trying to figure out. We evacuated with both of our vehicles, and I got to figure out what to do with my truck when I go to DC for 3 weeks.
That's the thing, like. Yeah. There's so much going on, and so people are like, overwhelmed with everything. But he basically just pointed out that Julian Assange, that journalists are participating in his demise and in hurting him by not standing up and pretty much cheering his path to being stuck in prison, which is, I think, as journalists and as media people, as commentators, whatever you consider yourselves, more than ever, I think we all need to fight for that, because it's so important for us, especially.
Okay. I don't think you got to tell the Assange guys on that stuff. I remember when Sagar and Crystal Ball said some shit, these guys were all over them. But I got to tell you something, too. We also saw a nice little tweet out there from Ryan Knight. I believe him to be sincere. I think he's gotten away from the mainstream media stuff. And I think that's great when people who were once wrong about Julian come out and say, you know what, I was wrong, and we got to get this right. Because this is about a guy exposing war crimes, and we shouldn't be shooting the messenger. Because it's a deadly game we're playing right now if we don't do anything to get Assange out. especially when it comes to the media and exposing things, because nobody's going to want to, if they get a hold of something, what are they going to want to put it out? If they can see that Assange can rot in jail, then, you know, the media is going to be less likely to put something out that's dropped to them or given to them from a source.
Well,
so
even when they do right now, if you look at the Washington Post's Afghan papers that they recently released, all it was a kid glove punch, basically saying 1% of what Chelsea Manning exposed over a decade ago. They literally just said, well, the generals have no idea what they're doing, and they haven't known what they've been doing for 10 years now. And all that was in response to was the fact that Jeff Bezos over at Amazon didn't get the contract for the CIA to house their computer servers. So he threw a little temper tantrum and exposed some of the information that the government put on Amazon servers because of the contracts with the Department of Justice and the Pentagon. So even in this current era of censorship, when a major institution like the Washington Post or CNN or the New York Times breaks a story, it's generally just to make a power play for their billionaire owner. And one of the big reasons that so many journalists are anti-Assange, aside from issues like the Mockingbird media and the intelligence community's infiltration of our institutions, one of the big things is literally just the culture. If you're someone that wants to be at MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, The Hill, for example, and you go to school to be a journalist, if you try to write a dissertation or a paper or an article about WikiLeaks, you're going to get told no. You're going to get told that's not a real source, he's not a real journalist, by the academic professors themselves. And then that mentality and mindset and groupthink carries on to the large institutions. So you have these major media conglomerates of the world where the journalists may not inherently be influenced directly by intelligence agencies or have handlers, but just the culture in and of itself doesn't allow them to speak out. And this is something that we saw the first time we were in DC back at the end of February. We were outside the Hill, actually, trying to raise awareness about Julian's situation. And a brave reporter, who I don't want to identify, came out to talk to us and literally said, like, hey, please make sure none of this is captured on video. If they even see me out here talking with an Assange supporter, then I'm going to lose my job. So the rot within our media institutions is so extreme that even when people are put on pedestals as these like shining examples of left-wing media, the institutions that they're housed within, no matter how good or bad those people may be, are fundamentally corrupt and in and of themselves need to be taken down for the lies and the essentially heresy that they put out to the American public and starting so many wars and smearing so many truth tellers.
Yep.
Well, you know, and I'm going to pose a question to you, Pasta and Fee. At what point do we start trying to hold members of the media accountable for being complicit in war crimes, for being complicit in this waste and fraud and abuse? And is that something that like independent media should take up the mantle of and try and get some awareness about, trying to get some accountability on part of media outlets who were either coerced or voluntarily lied to us over and over and over and over about?
I mean, we try to hold the mainstream media. We're all here because the mainstream media sucks, right? I mean, we'd probably be doing other stuff if the mainstream media didn't suck. However, I am happy that groups like yourself and keep doing what you're doing. You're going to blow up big one day. Somebody tells us that to us all the time for covering election integrity, and I think that, you know, people will come around and the mainstream media will be exposed. People will remember what Rachel Maddow was saying about the Russians while Julian Assange was getting locked up. The more and more the state puts their boot on our neck and suppresses our speech. So, I mean, you know, it's hard to really kind of point the finger and say, hey, these guys aren't doing anything, but we constantly do that to try to hold them accountable.
I think it's also important to note that we need to stop putting people on pedestals. I remember when Rising came and they were literally just saying what like indie media has been saying forever, and people were like, oh my God, that's so smart, that's so amazing. And it's like, I'm not trying to hate on them, but I am saying you guys like have to watch out they may be great people, however you feel about them, whatever, but the what they work for, the Hill, is still owned by a big corporation. They still have to abide by certain rules, and people were trying to call them independent media, and I'm like, that's not independent media, that's still corporate media. They're just doing a better job than what the mainstream media is doing, because the mainstream media is so terrible that you can tell right away the propaganda. And I think it's in a way it's good, because it's shown other people some information that they weren't able to grasp from mainstream media, people who watch mainstream media. But at the by the same token, I agree with Steve. Like, I think it's time to hold journalists accountable the same way we want to hold police officers who look the other way accountable for not stepping up and saying, hey, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that. We need to go to other journalists, that it shouldn't be taboo to talk about Julian Assange. It shouldn't be this libertarian right-wing idea to mention his name, and that we should be, if we are in truth trying to be journalists, we should go and seek the truth no matter what, because that was the fourth estate. That was the whole point of the fourth estate, was to keep the fourth branch of government to be the one that overlooks everything and sees to make sure that people are doing their goddamn jobs. But we have lost that into a propaganda machine for the plutocracy. So at this point, I think in order to get that back, we do have to start calling it out. We do have to start saying, why aren't you guys covering Julian Assange? Why didn't you mention him on your platform like we said on MPP? And then one day after, we get that tweet. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it matters if people like us who start gaining momentum begin talking about it. And so that's why I think it's important to not get all rose-colored glasses when a few people who have been part of the establishment suddenly start saying, well, yeah, okay, he did great. He's not a criminal. We have to make sure to keep a watch and to demand that they do better as journalists. As journalists, if you're going to be a journalist and be a truth seeker, right?
Yeah. I want to send a special shout out to Freebird for the Super Chat sticker. Thank you so much. And for Hugo Florence, greeting from Los Angeles. Yes, greeting from Los Angeles. And a special shout out to Glory Jones, who is actually watching our show and the Heat Bucks game at the same time. Thank you, Glory. We love you. Poikinen, let me ask you this question right here, okay? With the news today of the courts found that the NSA had illegally collected data from Americans and violated our Fourth Amendment rights, will there be any movement on Trump possibly pardoning Snowden? And if so, that conversation, if it comes into play, how does that bear in reference to Julian Assange?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to look at that, and I think that it's not in Trump's best interest to pardon Ed Snowden, because Trump, at the end of the day, works for the national security apparatus. It may be difficult for people to get their heads around, but we don't have governments that run intelligence agencies. We have intelligence agencies that run government.
Good voice.
And I mean, even Chuck Schumer admitted that on TV, telling the guy that was, they got 6 ways from Sunday to get you, and like it's not even in Trump's wheelhouse to agree with whistleblowers or to agree with, I guess, truth tellers in general. But when you add Julian Assange into the equation, any incentive whatsoever that he may have had to pardon Ed Snowden goes away, because in the superseding indictment that was tacked on to Julian's case not 3 weeks ago, it specifically goes after Sarah Harrison and WikiLeaks for their role in helping to get Ed out of Hong Kong. So this is Trump's Justice Department making a legal point to try to further attack people in the WikiLeaks circle for providing assistance to Ed Snowden. So for him to pardon Ed,
Right.
and yet turn around and keep the prosecution of Assange there, like, just on its face doesn't make much sense to me. And sorry, I mean, like, I don't want to bust anybody's bubble. You're holding out for a pardon for Ed Snowden, or if you're holding out for, the Trump administration to drop charges against Julian Assange, I don't think that is anywhere in the realm of possibility, and in fact borders on fantasy.
Really?
Yeah, I agree with it. Why would Trump do that?
For Snowden? Maybe to screw over a bunch of neoliberals and well, first of all, I thought he might pardon Assange because, well, I don't want to jump ahead because of the next question, but I thought there was a chance that Trump might do it. But I mean, for Snowden, wouldn't he want to rub it in the face and a lot of people on the left who, wouldn't do that and now get a lot of those votes? Like, I thought he might have done that right before the election so that he could bury Biden.
It's cynical enough to think that way. I mean, there's a certain reality to the fact that Trump will do things to quote unquote own the libs, but in terms of like pardoning the guy who proved to us exactly what we thought the NSA was doing, that in fact they were doing, Trump is ostensibly in charge of the NSA. This is an organization then inside his administration and his government that he clearly wants to protect. He went ahead and reauthorized the Patriot Act again, like they're all going to do, because you don't get to be president unless you're prepared to reauthorize the Patriot Act. This is, what allows that bulk collection of data to happen in the first place. This gives them, if not full legal permission, at least on paper, in the realm of legal permission, to spy on every American citizen at every second of every day through as many devices as possible. So it's in Trump's best interest to support the national security state in this matter.
And I want to hear what Andrew has to say about this real quick, but I just wanted to add that it's all thinking Trump is going to pardon anybody is thinking along the lines that he is going to be true to what he ran as. He ran as a right-wing populist. He hasn't been that. He has been intervening foreign policy wise, and he has been pushing the military industrial complex and the intelligence community. He hasn't really been true to that. So I honestly I think instead of stopping that sort of fascism, he has been promoting it. So it wouldn't make any sense for him to do that. Like, his base would not. I think the base he's aiming at isn't the libertarians and the more populist right. His base he's aiming at are the people that want law and order and security, and I think that's what he's going for.
Well, if there's one thing that Donald Trump is good at, to give him credit for something, is he's a great showman, right? He puts out great pieces that get people going, I guess. And the one thing that I think the most direct path for freedom for Julian, in my opinion, is Trump's base at Trump's rallies, because he has started having them again. And what I'd like to encourage everybody to do is go to Trump rallies on an issue-specific basis. Don't go there to talk about Medicare for all. Don't go to talk about Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders or Black Lives Matter or anything along those lines. Go there specifically to talk about Julian Assange. Go there with, 500 to 1,000 posters. If you're someone with a screen printer, make some T-shirts. Because what happens as you're communicating with his audience about Julian, they get this cognitive dissonance that actually makes them think, even just for a second. Because 4 years ago, Daddy Trump ran on, I love the WikiLeaks. We need more WikiLeaks. Yeah. Release the emails, right? And that's the red meat for his base. That's what gets them going, is those, single ideologue line statements. And I think taking hundreds, and if you have multiple people, thousands of posters to Trump rallies, handing them out to the crowds in line as they're entering into the building, you create this paradox where either the security guards at the door take a Free Julian Assange sign away, and you break the illusion that Trump supports him with those people, or security allows them to go in with those signs to maintain that illusion. And then those people are then holding signs up, and all you need is one brave, courageous person in that crowd to start chanting, "Free Julian Assange, no extradition." And if you can turn that Trump rally into a Julian Assange rally, Daddy Trump, in his showmanship and senile age, may just have his hand forced to pardon him to continue playing his base. So I really think that that's, as cynical as it sounds, one of the most direct paths to freedom is getting Trump's base to demand it of Trump while he is still on the campaign trail.
I think we have to go disguised as Trump fans and put the red hats on and get the Assange stuff.
You can do that, Pasta.
Hey, man, I could probably pass, fans. So, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I don't know what you're talking about that he doesn't pardon anybody. What about Susan B. Anthony, fam? Huh? What about Jack Johnson? Huh?
So, fam.
What about Scooter Libby?
With that pardoning, though, so with that level of showmanship, right, with Trump being like, "Oh, I'm going to pardon somebody," it got the internet talking about Julian again. Even though he didn't get pardoned, it made the world remember him until the media engines of the world pulled it back again with their censorship. Because that's when you started seeing another round of smear articles come out. Like the IB Times released literally the most disgusting thing you can possibly read. It calls WikiLeaks like Julian's dumping site. It's still, after a decade, tries to say that Julian is a rapist when everybody knows that those were allegations because the U.S. wanted to extradite him from Sweden, because the U.S. extradition laws in Sweden are so weak that they can just ask for someone in jail and get them. So we need to combat the propaganda at this point, because even when Julian's brought front and center, all of these little demons in the background start rearing their ugly heads again.
So what does it mean for companies like Twitter and YouTube, who reserve the right to censor anybody quoting WikiLeaks or using WikiLeaks? We saw that new thing that happened on YouTube at the very, very fine print. Is this justified? And how can they be sued? How can we hold them accountable?
Well, the problem is it's not just the major social media platforms. President Trump and his Department of Justice released the Counterintelligence Strategy, and Google this, Counterintelligence Strategy 2020 to 2022. In that document, it outlines the specific targets that the Department of Justice should be focusing on. You have Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, ISIS, in the same line as hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure organizations. So what happens is the government first says, "Hey, we're attacking these groups and we need your help, major media institutions." And then those media institutions like Twitter, who's owned by a Saudi prince, I believe, an oil baron, who Twitter also, one of their foreign policy advisors for the Middle East was a British military intelligence officer, right? These companies, they have no interest in putting these stories forward, because ultimately what it does is it hurts their bottom line. So I don't think there's any way to sue them at this point. There was a court trial a while back that said Twitter is a public space in some vague words. But even that, I think it's time that we go to new platforms, like ROKFIN, like Mastodon, because we're not going to be allowed on these platforms for much longer. We've had major Julian Assange accounts like Unity4J just arbitrarily get removed. And that's simply because they're putting out information which affects the bottom line of these for-profit warmongers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Andrew just told you all, if you haven't gone over to ROKFIN, ROKFIN, go over and do so. Sam, did you have a follow-up to that one?
No.
Steve, did you want to say anything about that? I mean, because I know there was an executive order from Trump not too long ago about taking some of the regulations or the oversight to the SEC. Now, I'm not a big Ajit Pai fan, but I don't think that Susan Wojcicki and YouTube, who's a big Hillary Clinton donator, should be able to decide what freedom of speech is and decide what to flag and take down off of YouTube.
Well, there's no daylight between these tech companies and the government.
Exactly.
There's none. And very, very rarely will you see a tech company stand up to the government, because one hand washes the other in this case. So as far as accountability or even litigation, I'm going to agree with Andrew on this. I don't think that there's a route for that, because we've got these companies that are so intertwined that brag about being part of the national security apparatus. Like Facebook is partnered with the Atlantic Council and a couple other government-funded think tanks, and we, I'm not a sue happy person anyway, So if I can avoid litigation in any way, shape, or form, I'm happy. But we have to move to different platforms and make them better. And we have to go down fucking swinging when they take us away from these ones. Like I'm not just going to roll up my Slow News Day Facebook because their terms of service are changing on October 1st to some really draconian shit. I'm not just going to pack up and go home. I'm going to make them make me leave, and the same way with Twitter. If I get banned from Twitter, it's going to be because I'm screaming the truth at the top of my lungs, not because I chose to leave to go to a safer space, as it were.
Exactly. And I don't think private companies or the government handling our freedom of speech, like and things like Twitter and things like Facebook is the answer. I don't think you have to choose either or. I think we can reject both. And I know Pasta and I have had this argument before on many occasions, but I just don't see that what Trump did is of benefit on either end. Like I understand it's a dire situation, but I'm not okay with Ajit Pai and those people or private companies being in charge of this. The people should be in charge, period.
That's really why we need some type of internet bill of rights. We don't need regulatory policies for Facebook or Twitter. We need a new literal amendments to the Constitution guaranteeing free access to the internet for everybody, unmitigated, and ensuring net neutrality. We need it to be built on a municipal broadband structure where cities can implement their own unique types of encryption that make it much more difficult for mass surveillance to take place. But the core thing that we need is to keep the government completely out of the internet, to have, when they try to do something, remove it completely. Like, for example, I don't think the FCC should even be allowed to exist at this point, because they're a regulatory captured institution. They're not there to ensure the free flow of communications. They're there to guarantee the largest telecommunications providers continue to be the largest telecommunications providers. So I think in a world where these kinds of institutions are simply stripped away and people are forced to come up with solutions on their own, it would be a much better situation for us, because we would start to see municipal broadband be rolled out a lot faster than it is now, because the FCC is one of the major players in stopping those cities from doing it.
Yeah, that is also true. And, you know what I'm saying? I'm not, I am one for institutions. I really am. And because I believe the wild, wild west is what's going on when it comes to the internet. So I'm looking for any type of solution. And I think what you're talking about is Internet Bill of Rights, right? I think you should write that. We'll call it the Andrew Smith's Bill of Rights for the internet. And we'll float that baby around. We'll get some signatures and try to get that into play. I never really even thought about that. I mean, that is really, I think that's a great idea to do so. So please, give us some points and stuff that we can point out. I think when it comes to these subjects, I always look to you guys because this is your wheelhouse and you're great about it. Let's talk about Rand Paul for a second, okay? Rand Paul once fought for immunity for Julian Assange if he would testify. Assange just states that WikiLeaks never releases their sources. I think we're all pretty familiar with that one time he did that look when they asked him if Seth Rich was his source. He almost did everything but say yes. Do you think that Julian would take that deal if it was offered to him today?
When Julian was offered that deal, it was set up through a back channel between Kim.com, Dana Rohrabacher, and Donald Trump. And essentially what Trump was requesting for a pardon was to have Julian step forward and say it was Seth Rich that leaked these documents. This was 6 months after Julian went on an Icelandic TV show and offered I believe it was $20,000 reward for the information leading to the capture of Seth Rich's assailant. And in that same interview, I believe, also said that this information didn't come from a state actor. So I'm a little cynical about that, because to me, it's almost like Edison telling Tesla, hey, I'll give you $20,000 to reinvent the motor, where Donald Trump is saying, hey, I'll give you a pardon if you tell me the thing everybody already knows.
Right.
You think people already know that? You think people? I think a lot of people still doubt that. I mean, I know we know that. We think it's that, but for him to do that publicly in a trial, you don't think that's worth it for Julian Assange with everything he's been through? Because I think that would be beneficial for the country right now. Because remember, in 2016, we did have WikiLeaks, which showed us everything. The thing that sucks for election integrity activists like Convo Couch is that we didn't have WikiLeaks in 2020 to further back our story. So if we got some more, information from Julian Assange, when he can tell us, if he can tell us that it is for sure Seth Rich, wouldn't that be really beneficial to our democracy?
It would be counter to everything that WikiLeaks stands for. You would be asking Julian Assange to give up the core concepts of his organization. And source protection is the most important thing a journalist can do and offer, is protect the anonymity or identity of their source. So if Julian were to do that, he would basically be wiping his ass with everything that he had built and worked for and spoke on prolifically for years and years and years. And I don't know, there's no indication on September 2nd, 2020 that Julian Assange has undergone a fundamental shift in thinking. So I don't think it's likely. In terms of what it would do to democracy, you would confirm what a lot of people already know. You would, okay, let me preface it by saying this. In an increasingly secular society, the same energy that we would normally transfer into religion, regardless of what it is, has been put into political identity. And so when you are arguing with someone who has religion behind their political thought, they're going to react the same way a fundamentalist religious person would if you present to them information that is counter to their supernatural belief system. And they're going to retreat, they're going to shrink back further, they're going to run to people of the same faith to have them coddle that person. So I believe that were that to happen, if Julian came out and said yes, it was Seth Rich, you would get an overwhelming number of people going, well, I don't believe it. I'm not going to believe it. I refuse to believe it. It was Russia. It was Russia the whole time. I know it was Russia because Rachel Maddow fucking told me every day for 4 years straight. And that confirms my biases, gives me a dopamine hit the same way I would by having a spiritual experience. And that's what's real, not reality. Reality is something that happens to me. This is happening to me.
And I think the overwhelming majority of the liberal establishment would do that. They would say, oh, well, he made a deal with Trump, or he made a deal with the right. So that's why he's saying that. Oh, like they cut him a deal. This is why he said they wouldn't not vilify him if he did that. And then he wouldn't win anything because like Steve said, he would be completely betraying the journalist, a part of him that has to protect the source. It would just be diametrically opposing everything he stands for in a way.
And there's actually,
guys, that was a great show. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry. Andrew, get the last word. We got to get out of here shortly, and then go in to tell everybody where they can find you online for this weekend and coming up. So go ahead, my buddy.
Absolutely. Real quick, just to wrap up the point about the Julian Assange, Seth Rich. There is a lawsuit by the Rich family against Fox News for an article that's no longer on Fox News' website about Seth Rich. In that case, Julian Assange has been called to testify. It's not clear if he'll get to testify, but the judge has allowed him to say, yes, we would like Julian to come as a witness to talk about this. And as much as I would like him to continue to protect his source and have it be us, the independent media, that raises the alarm about Seth Rich, there may be some development in that court trial one way or the other. But you can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. You can find us, Steve, I, Misty, Kendra, Kimber, Sleepy Josh, and everyone else behind the scenes at action_4 Assange on Twitter. And you can find all of our call to actions and our DC event schedule and our GoFundMe link up on our website, which is action4assange.com.
Thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure. Thanks for the information. We'll be keeping tabs on you while you're over there.
Please do. So for pasta jar, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just said please do. Thank you very much. Great.
You guys are
guys,
awesome.
We'll keep eyes for pasta Jardula.
Fiorella.
Johnny's 2 in the 1s and 2s with Action for Assange in the house. They're going to DC. Look them up. Help them. Support them. Speak out for Julian Assange.
Convo out. Free speech. Peace. Thank you, guys. You guys